Hello everyone, in this episode I sat down with Rose Hope, who's a dynamic thought leader in spiritual and business development. She's been a speaker at a number of institutions like Harvard University and as a figure on ABC, NBC, Global Television, and it was just so amazing to sit down with her and hear about her new book and most importantly how her near-death experiences shaped her spiritual growth and the spark of her spiritual journey. So please listen in, and I know this episode will change your life. As always, if you want to stay up to date with the episodes, please subscribe on Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube. And as well, you can join my mailing list to get more updates about future events and episodes. Your support means the world to me, and I'm so excited to be hosting 2 events here in London in November, as well as a retreat in Iceland and France in 2025. So please get in touch and stay subscribed and follow my Instagram to stay up to date on these. So much love. Hello everybody, welcome to this week's episode of Wisdom Within. Today I'm joined by the amazing Rose, who does so many incredible things that I was just saying to her, I don't know where this conversation is going to go because there's so many different things that you do in terms of healing, your spiritual service, and it's just so beautiful to see how you're showing up in this world. And I'm so honored to have you here. So if you just want to start by saying hi, I don't even know where in the world you are, just kind of giving everyone an intro to you.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm so happy to be with you. I'm a small town girl from Canada, Alberta, Canada. So
Okay.
I was born and raised here and kind of lived near the country. My childhood consisted of running through the fields and catching frogs in the ponds. Uh,
Wow.
and being on our bikes till all hours of the night, riding around with friends and things like that. But I if you want to kind of catch up to me as an adult, I was people pleaser overachiever. So
Okay.
that was kind of that was my realm for most of my life. And I really struggled to find happiness in this world. I thought happiness meant, you got older, you got a career, you had a family, you bought a house, you bought a car, and that was what success was, and that's where joy was. But I found out very quickly that's not actually how it works.
Mm.
And so my mission now is to help people to see how that they can create their own heaven on earth and how to do that without getting lost in this world of chaos and go and distraction and addiction and all the things that go along
So
with it.
beautiful. So beautiful. I think as we create this vision to bring heaven into earth right here, right now, it is so easy just to get sucked into the chaos. And a bit of background about me is that I've been traveling the world and I've just returned back to London. And I really am seeing that contrast in places like Bali, where there's this new
Yeah.
vision for the world and everyone is so tuned in and excited about life, versus here it's like, no, like this is the way life is. You have to
Oh, the
and
dread
it's
of that.
yes. And
Yes.
so to those people who are in that place that are listening, where do you begin with creating heaven on earth in your life?
Mhm. I love that question, Talia. It's beautiful because that was the big question I had. I was like, well, what is the purpose of my life here? What am I really doing here? Am I just keeping up with the Joneses in the rat race? And
Yeah.
I too did some traveling last year. I went to the South Pacific Ocean to Tahiti and I went island hopping. And let me tell you, they have something figured out there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I came back to the world being like, oh my God, we're doing things backwards here. What are we doing? What are we
Yeah.
teaching our children? And how are we getting so caught up in this three-dimensional world? And so it really took me for a loop too, even though I had been working on this idea of creating heaven on earth, that contrast
Yeah.
was so like obvious, and
Yeah.
so that's really what you have also come to see, is that contrast between how we can live more simply, how we can live with more grace, more
Mm.
compassion, more ease,
Yeah.
right? Versus getting caught in this trap of complete distraction and go, go, go all the time.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I really think it is. It's about learning to become present because in the now, there is no fear, there is no anxiety. There's just
That's right.
the eternal now.
Yeah, that fear and anxiety, they're really future energies, right? When
Yeah.
we are really allowing ourselves to become fully present, that's where all the magic is. And
Yeah.
that's actually the secret. That's where heaven is too.
Mm-hmm.
Heaven is not outside of you. Heaven is not in the future. Heaven is right here, right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so our job is to be able to allow ourselves to witness that, allow ourselves to remember the truth of who we are, and in doing that, going on that beautiful soul journey, if you will, walking the path inward, oh, I'm telling you, that's where the magic lies.
Yeah. Hence the name of my podcast, Wisdom Within. It's all within you.
It is all, I have a quote: in every given moment, you have everything you need and then some.
Mm,
We have everything that we need in any given moment. We were innately given the joy and the happiness. It's just that over time, we've been conditioned to the fear or to certain belief systems that really hold us back or hold us hostage. And
yeah.
that's, most of my life, I spent it, you know, trying to fight against that and trying to create this outer heaven. I thought, oh, I'll be happy when I have success. I'll be happy when I have my kids. I'll be happy when this happens. And
Mm,
that was a losing game. And it was so frustrating because the harder I tried, the more sad and more guilty I became, because I thought, man, I have everything that everyone said would bring happiness.
yeah.
And then, but I wasn't feeling grateful. I was feeling so sad and depressed and alone and, disconnected.
Mm.
And then I was in this perpetual cycle of beating myself up, So thank goodness for a couple of significant experiences, particularly my near deaths, that really helped to catalyze that for me.
Yeah, so that's an excellent opportunity for you to go into those near-death experiences. So what's quite funny is that my journey also started with near-death experiences, but not my own. It was I just became really fascinated by reading about them. I
Uh,
wrote this like 10,000 word dissertation on near-death experiences, comparing people's accounts of them to religious accounts. And that's kind of where my journey began because I was like, wait, if all these people are saying the same thing, then clearly there is something beyond. And what can we learn from that in the here and now? So it's so amazing to speak to someone who's actually had one that can
really
talk
can.
from experience.
Oh,
So, yeah, how did that catalyze your journey and what were your experiences?
well, so my first one I had when I was five. I was 5 years old and I was eating one of those round hard candies, like they call them jawbreakers. And so big in my mouth, and I'm walking around my house, and my dad said, "Go sit down before you choke." And I turned to go sit down, and sure enough, I choked. So my dad came running over, wrapped his arms around my waist, started heaving, doing the Heimlich maneuver, but that object did not come out. I remember thinking in my 5-year-old mind that my head was for sure going to pop off. Like that's how intense it felt.
Wow.
Um, but that it didn't work. And so I went limp in my dad's arms. And so what happened for me at 5 is I hovered above my body and my dad, and I watched the chaos below. I remember watching my mom run to go get the phone. I remember my older sister peeking around the counter. And these are things that I recounted to my family later. And my mom's like, "How would you know that? You were completely unresponsive and not breathing. Like, how would you know these things?" I'm like, "I saw it. I remember." So I was hovering, watching this happening below, but I didn't feel that chaos. I felt peace.
Mm,
I felt completely calm. I felt like I was being held in the arms of God or heaven, whatever you would want to call that. And so that's as much as I recall from that experience myself. I just remember watching everything below like it was a movie. and feeling completely fine. Everything was okay in from my experience, from my perspective. So my dad ended up doing what, by the way, you should never do. He used his thumb, he pushed against my throat and just was able to get just enough leverage to be able to get the jawbreaker out. So he got me breathing again. And so after that, all the blood vessels in my face were like all black and blue. So I had all these polka dots of purple and blue on my face. And that took a couple weeks to reside, but something else showed up after that experience. My sensitivities became really heightened. I started to have really intense dreams, like dreams where I would be lucid, like I would know I was in the dream, or I would be uh, have sleep paralysis where I would wake up and I'd go to call for my mom for help and I couldn't even speak, but I would be awake and I would still be witnessing some of the things that were in that dream. So it was very intense for me.
Mm.
And then what happened was I started to become precognitive. So I started to see things before they would happen. So one night in particular, I had this dream that a neighbor's mom had died. And so I got up that morning. I said, Mom, I had a dream last night. So and so's mom died. And my mom's jaw literally almost hit the floor. And she's like, How do you know that? I said, Well, I had a dream. And she goes, Well, I just got off the phone. And indeed, the woman had passed. So, it was these sorts of things that started to show up after that. But because I was raised Catholic, and although I was raised in a very loving home, I'm very grateful for my upbringing, but I was raised Catholic and my mom didn't really know what to do with me, I don't think.
Yeah.
And I could feel her discomfort. And so what did I do? I started tucking those things away. I started hiding that intuition and the feelings that I had. And, but yet I could feel so much. So, I put all of those things away. But as a result of that near death, I wanted to also save lives. So I became an EMT and paramedic. I worked as a firefighter. And so that was my first career because I wanted to save lives. And then something really interesting started to happen in that career. Spirits started to come home with me. And I thought I was losing my mind. Okay. Like, if you can imagine, I've got this science background. I was an overachiever, right? So I was like that top student all the time. And so I needed logical, scientific explanations. And I couldn't explain the feelings that I would have when I would leave a patient who had deceased, who had died. And all of a sudden I'm at home and I can feel this energy. So I remember one case in particular. It was an elderly woman who had passed, and I had to stay with her body for quite some time to take pictures with the RCMP, the police officers. And I remember just having such EBGBs about it. I went home and I had like 6 showers, like I was like, oh, this is so weird. Like, and so I really thought that I was losing my mind. And so what did I do? I kept it hidden. I kept hiding it because it felt so uncomfortable. Fast forward, I ended up teaching in that career as well as in the dental profession. So I taught both in the EMS field and dental. And now I'm in my mid 20s and I'm still struggling to figure life out. I'm still like playing the I'll be happy when game. Like, oh, okay, I'm gonna have this career and then I'll be happy and then I'll get married and then I'll be happy or what have you. And something else happened. I was 26. I was recovering from a knee injury surgery that I had had. And so I had complete reconstruction on my left ACL. And so I'm at home recovering. Now I'm hobbling from the kitchen to my bed in the living room. My brother-in-law is with me. And all of a sudden, as I'm trying to get to my bed, I start to see black spots and then everything goes black. I am gone. And I was transported to a whole nother place that I can only describe as heaven. It was the most euphoric, beautiful sensation I've ever had. It was the most tangible experience I've ever had. And I was surrounded, Talia, by these incredible orbs of light, like the brightest colors that you can imagine. And they were so warm and they were so loving. Like I felt like I was really being carried. Very different from when I was only 5. Now I had this conscious awareness of where I was. And I remember thinking for a brief moment about my family and being worried about them. But literally, as soon as I thought it, it was like it was vanished and it didn't matter. Like where I was all that mattered. I was fully present. I was fully there. And I remember saying, not in words, but I thought it, um, oh, I'm staying here. This is amazing. I remember that going through, and they heard me and they communicated back to me, not with words, but I understood what they said, some sort of vibration or whatever you would want to call that. And they said, oh, thank you, but you've got work to do, right? It was like, you're not done yet. There's more for you to do. And so at that moment, it was like all of a sudden they were gone. And I found myself coming to with my brother-in-law looking at me with wide eyes, you know? So that second experience, here's what's interesting about it. Because again, I'm thinking like, oh my God, people are really going to think I'm crazy now. If not only I'm telling them spirits used to come home with me, but now I've seen angels, right? So now I'm really going through this process of, oh my gosh, like maybe I'm really losing it. Is this stuff even happening? Is this even real? Like questioning, right?
Mhm.
And so a few days later, that experience was so profound. I had to tell people that were close to me. Like I knew I had to get it out because it had moved me so deeply in my spirit. Like I was like, oh my God, heaven is real. I'm not afraid to die. Like something really incredible happened to me in that time. So I'm now 3 days later, still recovering, and I'm telling a girlfriend who came for a visit about this experience with the angels because I need to express it. Like I can't hold it anymore. And so I'm telling her about this angelic experience. And my brother-in-law, who was the one that caught me when I had originally gone unresponsive, he overheard. And this was the biggest blessing ever. He came running into the kitchen. He said, I knew it. He said, I felt the angels too.
Mm.
So he, at the same time as I was experiencing what I was experiencing, he was also experiencing something in the conscious realm, in the three-dimensional realm. And so he described it as this. He says, I couldn't find your pulse. I didn't think you were breathing. I was about to call 911. Like I was like panicked. So like you were dead, like as far as I was concerned. He's like, and he said as soon as he went to go to get help, go for the phone or whatever, he said he felt these energies come in. And he said it was the most bizarre thing. He felt these energies come in and he heard them say, she's going to be fine. Just wait a minute. She's going to be okay. And he said he took a breath, he listened to that, and then he said, within a few seconds, I opened my eyes with a smile on my face.
Mm.
So he too had an experience. And this actually does happen with some NDE survivors. And maybe you came across this, where someone will, as a bystander, will also have some sort of
Mm.
spiritual experience as well.
Yeah.
And so it was beautiful because it validated it for me. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to start talking about this then. And if people are going to judge me, I'm okay with it. You know, again, remembering I came from this very scientific, logical background, you know, and now all of a
Yeah.
sudden I'm seeing that there's so much more. So a lot of people will say, they'll say, oh, well, after that second near death, then you figured it out. No, not quite. It took me another handful of years even after that, because what happens to a lot of people who have had near deaths is that we crave going back to that place. And so I actually really struggled to continue in this three-dimensional realm in my human form
Yeah.
because like I knew what was on the other side. And I just like I had this craving, I had this insatiable thirst to find heaven, right? For me to go back to that place or to find it or to replicate it here in this realm, right? And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to marry the man of my dreams. I'm going to have, you know, babies, and that's going to allow me to feel that taste of heaven. I'm going to have a successful career. That's going to allow me to have the taste of heaven. So then I got really caught up in the I'll be happy when game that I alluded to earlier. And here I am now feeling worse than ever before. And after I had my second child, my son, it was about 6 months after, and I didn't know it at the time, but I was also experiencing some postpartum depression. And I was in such despair. Talia, I wanted to just go back to that beautiful, euphoric state with the angels, like heavenly place, right? And I couldn't find it. I felt like I was failing. You know, God had given me not one extra chance, but now two extra chances. And I was just so struggling. And so, in some deep despair and pain, I was contemplating whether or not I would stay here. I was, had decided that me leaving, me taking my own life would be better for everybody. And so when you're in such a deep place of despair, it just feels like you're in so much pain that you couldn't possibly be of service to anybody else.
Yeah.
And so I was in that place, and it was a very dark place, the deep depression, deep despair, and so much emotional pain. And so one night in desperation, I prayed and I said, okay, God, show me another path, because right now this is the path that I'm on. And I'm contemplating how I'm going to take my life at that point so that it's clean and easy and my kids don't find me and my husband doesn't find me and whatever, right? I'm thinking about all these things. And I said, show me another path, because I don't see one.
Yeah.
And something so miraculous happened for me in that ask. Divine delivered. And I was visited by what I consider an angel. And I was shown this incredible vision of what I needed to do. It was such a powerful vision, and it was so big that I just knew that if I leaned into it, that I would pull myself out of this hole, out of this pit of despair that I was in. So I literally got up the next morning and I started this business. Now, the business was a holistic healthcare system. And little did I know that as I started to build it, I would meet people that had all these different modalities and intuitive gifts. And so these people that had already stepped into their intuitive gifts and things like the Akashic Records, which is now my area of expertise, this stuff was so profound to me. And I was just so hungry and curious. So I actually decided to take some courses as a skeptic, right? Again, science background. So going in as a skeptic, I'm like, there's no way people can read energy like this and, all of this, right? And I stepped in and I opened my heart, and I'm telling you, the floodgates opened. Everything that I had stuffed away from the time that I was little had come back to my memory. And I realized that I had these incredible gifts of reading energy, of clairvoyancy, of claircognizance, of clairsentience. Like, I had all of these gifts, and they were just waiting for me to unwrap them. And so that's what I started doing. I started unwrapping those gifts. I started going inward. I started walking that journey with my soul. And, it's interesting to me because we as human beings, we oftentimes will distract ourselves and avoid that journey, right? We do everything out here. I was always like, okay, I'll find joy out here, in the doing. That's not where it is. That's not where it is, right?
Yeah.
And so I went on this incredible journey. And what I found was it wasn't so scary after all. I thought I would be pulling out skeletons and having to go through dark nights of the soul. And not saying that, it's a cakewalk, but most certainly that journey into my soul and alongside of my soul has been the greatest gift of all.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that with me and here. I know that this will touch so many people because genuinely, when you were mentioning like the angels coming, I could like feel them. Like I chills like all
Yeah.
over my body.
Yes, it's always so beautiful because every time I speak about the angels, I get goosebumps every time,
Yeah.
without fail. And a lot of people have said that. They're like, oh my God, as soon as you started talking about them, I could feel their love, or I could feel their energy coming in. So I love that you had that experience too.
Yeah. And I just think It is such a beautiful journey, and sometimes you do need to hit a rock bottom to get to that state where you're begging on your knees asking.
Yeah, I did. I
Yeah.
needed to get there. And, people be like, what, the near deaths weren't enough? And I'm like, no, I had to go into a place of despair.
Yeah.
And I want to tell people that are listening, you don't need to self-induce a near-death experience to choose the path to your soul, by the way. And you don't need to get to that point where you're like, either I'm staying, or going kind of thing to choose that.
Yeah.
It's the beauty of the power of free will. Like this is one of the greatest gifts that have been bestowed upon us, that we do have power in choosing how we show up, how we respond, right? We have so much power, and yet most of us have given it away to others or pass it off to our ego mind.
Yeah.
And that brings up this whole process of the ego mind, because our ego mind, also known as the false self in metaphysics, the ego mind, when we think thousands of years ago, it was there so we would run from the predators, right? We would know, how to stay alive. It kept us alive. And the ego still has that role. However, because over thousands of years, we've let the ego start to run the show, it's actually taken away from some of our free will. Like some people will let their ego tell them stories that are not even true. And I'll give you a really good example of this because it happened for me. I
Yeah.
was actually writing a final exam of a final class for a degree. I also have a health management degree. And so I'm on the home stretch, right? I'm on the final test of the final class. But the previous course I had taken, I had failed an exam. And I had not failed before, but that exam I failed and I had to rewrite it. So now here I am, and successfully, right? But now here I am on this very last exam. I put so much pressure on myself. And the whole time I'm writing this exam, all I can hear is, you failed last time, you're going to fail again, right? You don't know any answers. So my ego was running amok, right? And telling me this narrative that I was failing this exam. Well, by the time I was done, I knew I had failed. So I got to my car, I bawled my eyes out because I was like, I just want this degree to be done. It should be over. And now I'm going to have to do a rewrite, and I was so frustrated with myself. And so I was so upset. I got home and I emailed my prof and I said, hey, I know it's Easter weekend. You're probably not marking these, but I know I failed. And I just want to know which areas I need to start studying for to do the rewrite, because I just really want to get this done. And her response, she was so beautiful and responded right away and said, I don't know whose test you think you wrote, but you got 87%. I got 87 when I convinced myself I had failed.
Yeah.
This is how powerful that ego mind is when we allow it to be. And that ego, that false self, is going to make up all sorts of stories that aren't even true. Its intentions are good. The ego wants to keep you safe. So it's trying to protect you and prepare you. But the reality is that it's full of it most of the time.
Yeah.
And so the invitation for everyone is to build a loving relationship with their ego self, but to not let it run the show. And I guarantee you that most of you listening today are letting the ego in some way or another run the show for you, telling you narratives and stories. How often has it happened where you're like, oh my God, that breakup or that job loss or whatever it was the worst thing ever? Only days later or weeks later, or maybe even years later, you're like, oh my God, thank God that happened. Have you had that happen to you?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Where you're like, in the moment you think it's the worst thing ever, then only to realize it was like the best thing ever. Our ego will tell us all sorts of stories. And then we get hooked into that and then we suffer, right? So, how beautiful is it that we have this opportunity to recognize that we're not our ego thoughts?
Yeah.
There's so much more than that. And if we could become the witness to that or the observer in that, and we get that ego to step aside, that's, oh, it's magic, because now all of a sudden I get a thought and now I say, oh, thank you, ego, but I've got this. Or I'll say, oh, thank you. What is this really about? Is this even true? Is this even true? And so I challenge my ego now. And so my ego knows not to intercept as much, which is a huge bonus because I don't let it run amok anymore and get caught up in the hamster wheel. I used to worry and be on the hamster wheel and cycle through experiences. Do you do this too? right? Where you get on the hamster wheel and then you keep playing these scenarios and then they don't even turn out anything close to what you imagine them to be, right? And so it's this wonderful opportunity to befriend that ego. And this is one of the best tools that I was ever given. Give your ego a name so
Yeah.
you can more easily separate yourself from it. I mean, you can call it whatever you want, but the point being is that you have an opportunity to separate yourself from it, right? So
Yeah.
then you can discern when that ego is coming in and actually, taking hostage, right? Or whether it is really serving your highest good. And that's been one of the biggest blessings for me in understanding myself. And it's been part of my soul work. So people might think like, well, no, that's your mind. Why is that part of your spirituality and your work? Well, because the ego self or the false self and my true self, my higher mind or my God mind, when we get the ego to step aside and put it in its place, it opens up this incredible pathway for this relationship with our divine mind, right? Some of us will call it the higher self, right? The God self, the God mind, whatever you want to call it. But we have this incredible infinite access to divinity within us. Like you said, the wisdom within.
Yeah.
And so, this is where that relationship now can forge ahead. And I also encourage you give your higher self a name as well. And now that you've got a handle on these aspects of your being, oh man, clarity comes. More ideas that are part of your divine path show up.
Mm.
And so that's been one of the greatest tools for me is recognizing I'm multidimensional and then creating these relationships within myself.
Yeah, and I also think it's so important here to pick up on just how peaceful of a place dying is, because I think in the West it's something people fear so much.
Wow.
And it also leads to the question of, if death is such a good place, what are we doing here?
Mm,
And I think we both know it's to create the heaven in the here and now on
yeah.
earth.
Mm,
And it's just such a beautiful way to see this life.
yeah.
And yeah, you maybe want to speak into that and also talk about your book that you wrote that's in the background.
Oh my goodness. Well, let's talk about the heaven on earth first, because I think that this is such an important conversation to be had. And like I said, I looked everywhere outside of myself for it. I tried everything, okay? And the reality is that once we tune into the frequency within ourselves, I feel this heavenly space within myself. And as a result of that, guess what? Everything outside of me is a reflection of that.
Mm.
Now, it doesn't mean I don't still have drama and trauma and things that show up. Of course I do. But because I've got this sense of heaven within me, that is reflected back to me, even in the hardest of situations. So, situations that might seem awful aren't quite so bad. And the situations that are okay are even better and more extraordinary than ever because I'm allowing the heaven to be within me here and the now and allowing myself to access all of the things that we desire here in the now. Even as I'm speaking, I can feel this joy rising up in me about talking about having this conversation. And the truth is that divine is our supply of all things, and divine is within you. So if that is true, then that means that everything that you need, again, like I said at the beginning, you have access to grace, peace, ease, joy, all the things we desire. They're not found outside of us. Once we tune into their frequency within us, then the outer world then is a reflection of that. So heaven's already here. We've just got to be willing to tune into the frequency of that within ourselves, right? There's a little, actually, Edo Erasmus, I had interviewed him on my podcast, and he reminded me of this story. And this how the story goes. It's God, and God sitting with his or her, however you define God, creator's council. And so God's sitting there with all the council members, and God said, these human beings, they're starting to get to me. I got to go hide somewhere. And so one of the council members said, oh, I know, go to the highest mountain and hide up there. Nobody will ever find you up there. And another council member said, no, 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 they'll find you there. Go to the deepest depths of the ocean. For sure, they will not find you there. And another council said, no, 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 they'll find you there. Go into the heart of man. They will never look there.
Mm.
And oh, and I got goosebumps saying that because this was my story. I was so busy seeking God out there or seeking joy out there, happiness or heaven or whatever you want to call it out there. It's not out there. And so I know that divine is within me, and I know divine is my supply. So as I lean into that, knowing that and building that trust relationship is so critical. Maybe you call it faith, whatever you want to call that. But that trust is so powerful because the more I trust, the less I worry, the less fear I have, because
Yeah.
I know that everything that needs to happen is happening exactly as it should. In mysticism, we call that continual expectancy. And continual expectancy does not mean I expect a particular outcome, but rather I expect that whatever the outcome is exactly what is needed for my highest good.
Yeah.
So even if stuff shows up that I'm like, oh, I didn't want it to turn out that way, I can believe or I can trust that it turned out exactly the way that it needed to for my highest good and the highest good of others. And again, that takes away that suffering.
Yeah.
When we worry, when we stress about things, in a way, indirectly, we're kind of saying, okay, I don't trust divine to supply me. I don't trust divine to take care of me. And so what that does is it kind of it breaks down that energetic connection and that ability for divine to provide us with everything that we really do want, right?
Yeah. I think what I notice is that, especially here, people don't have that connection and they say things like, well, if God were real, why would he create these hurricanes and these
Mhm.
wars and these shootings and all these things? And what do you say to people who say that to you? I'm interested to know.
This is a great question. I love that you asked this because you're right. There's some real difficult things that show up in our world. And so these things will show up and we kind of question, we think, okay, this isn't very godly. What is this experience about? But what it is actually coming back to is our perception of the experience. And so we perceive things and we judge things as being good or bad, right?
Yeah.
But in reality, we don't have the whole picture. So we're judging it looking at a couple of pieces of the puzzle, but we don't see the whole puzzle. There's a wonderful story that comes with this, and I'll share this to reinforce this idea. It's about a farmer and his prize stallion. And one day the farmer loses his stallion, and all the neighbors look for the stallion. They can't find the stallion anywhere. It's gone. And so the neighbors go to the farmer and they say, oh, this is the worst news ever. What are you going to do without your horse? This is so horrible. And the farmer shrugs and says, who knows what's good or bad? We'll have to wait and see. And the
Yeah.
next day comes along, and now his stallion shows up, but with a herd of wild horses. So now he's got a dozen horses and his stallion back. And the neighbors come over and they say, oh, rejoice, best day ever. Such great news. And the farmer says, who knows what's good or bad? We'll have to wait and see. The next day comes along, and now the farmer's son is out training the new horses, and he gets bucked off and he breaks a leg. And the neighbors come to the farm and they say, oh, this is horrible news. What will you do without your son to help you? This is so horrible. And the farmer says, who knows what's good or bad? We'll have to wait and see. And the next day comes along, and now the army's coming to town to take all the fit soldiers away to war. Well, they can't take the son. He's got a broken leg.
Yeah.
So you can see how this story could go on forever. And I know that when we are in moments of grief, okay, I'll admit it's hard to accept that there's a bigger reason or a bigger picture for us to see.
Yeah, and
When
it's
we're
also it's
grief,
also having the patience to allow that to unfold because
it
sometimes you
is
won't know until 2 years, 10 years, like
maybe even a lifetime,
yeah,
right? It might take a whole lifetime to understand why something happened the way that it did.
yeah,
And, we get caught up in blame and we get caught up in shame and anger and all of those things. But the invitation for us is to witness this world with a bit more neutrality. I'm not saying don't celebrate your wins, okay? Because I know the farmer always was who knows what's good or bad, still celebrate those things. But when something shows up that is hurtful, painful, not the way you thought it was, frustrating, whatever, there is an opportunity for us to receive the value in even the worst of experiences. You know, you think about the natural disasters happening, and what you're seeing is stories of people coming through and helping one another and creating community and, you know, going out of their way to serve other people. I mean, there's something good in that too, yeah?
Yeah.
And so again, even though in the moment we might not witness it, the idea is that we can lean into trusting that at some point there will be some good that will come out of it, that there will be some sort of lesson or growth. Everything that exists has divinity in it for us to receive. The
Yeah,
question is
because
whether or not we want to receive it.
yeah, because grief itself is a portal. The depth of that
Yes.
emotion is a portal in itself.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful portal. If, you know, every energy is, you know, we perceive grief and anger and, you know, some of those lower vibration or more dense energies as being bad, but really in reality, there's opportunity in those emotions too. There's gold in those emotions.
Yeah.
And our job is to be able to say, what's in this for me? This is a very painful experience. I don't like how I'm feeling, but there's something in this for me, and I'm willing to receive that.
Yeah.
And that's part of our alchemization process. You know, something that I teach my clients, especially when they're sitting kind of in those lower vibration or those lower density energies. One of the processes to alchemize that energy is to actually look at that energy. And I like to cut my hands like I'm holding a cute little bird or a bunny or something. And I say, oh, grief. Usually I'm bawling, right? Oh, grief. Oh my God, this is so horrible. I'm so sad that you're back again. But I know you're here to teach me something, and I see you.
Mm.
You see, these energies just want to be seen and heard just like us.
Yeah, instead of
But when
suppressing.
we honor the energy, and I'm not saying sit in the cesspool forever, I'm saying have a conversation with that energy. Again, build a relationship with that energy, right? I now have a relationship with grief, right? So that I know that I'm getting something out of it. And
Yeah.
so I ask of that grief, I say, what are you teaching me? And sometimes it's saying, look how deeply you got to love.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes that grief says, now you'll understand somebody else's pain.
Yeah.
Sometimes that grief says, you know, whatever, it's teaching me something every time. And as soon as I hold the space for that grief and I say, I see you instead of burying it away, because I used to do that. Like I had so much grief growing up with death, because I lost a lot of family and a lot of friends in my life, and I had stuffed it away. I had buried it deep inside of me.
Yeah.
And that did nothing but make me feel sick and uncomfortable. And every time I'd have to go through it again, you know, I'd distract myself either with work or whatever I could to escape, you know. But instead, now I hold space for the grief. I talk to it. I let myself see it and hear it. And in doing that, the grief becomes less dense. The grief doesn't be, it's not so low vibration anymore
Yeah.
because we've been able to alchemize some of that energy, receive the value in that.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
again, value in everything. Our job is to receive and squeeze and leverage every opportunity, even if our perception of it is that it is a bad experience or bad or no good or whatever it might be. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. I also want to hear about the book you wrote.
Oh, write the book. Oh, thank you. So, yeah, so this book actually, believe it or not, I started writing when I was about 25.
Yeah.
And so this book has been like 2 decades in the making to age myself. So I've been working on this book, you know, sporadically as I did all the other things I was doing. And over the last couple years, Spirit was just like, you need to get this out there. Like this message needs to be heard. So it is based on my near-death experiences and my life journey. However, it's through the lens of a fictional character because I didn't want the book to be about me. I wanted it to be a book about everyone. And so it follows this beautiful character named Celeste. And she goes through some near-death experiences. And in one of the near-death experiences, she goes into the angel realm. And she lives in the angel realm and experiences the angels firsthand and leans into also the Akashic Records, which is your soul's library, which is an area of specialty for me. And so, you know, she goes into this like angelic library and learns all these things about herself. It really is a book of remembrance. And this is the first of three. So this is a trilogy. And so we're working on the second book already. But
Wow.
yes, this book, The Ark, ARC, by the way, it's about the angel kingdom and about remembrance and us remembering who we are and loving ourselves as we are. So it's a beautiful book. My inspirations were The Celestine Prophecy and The Alchemist. Those are two of my favorite books.
Wow.
And so those books, had such a beautiful way of telling a story, but with these beautiful nuggets of
Yeah.
insight and wisdom. And
Wow.
so that's the essence of this book. So it is available on Amazon or on my website. And so, yeah, I just wanted to get this message out to the world to help people remember. Some of the people that have been reading it, they like read it and they're like, oh my God, like I can feel the energy already moving inside of me.
Mm.
And that was my hope, was that as people read it, they would remember who they really were.
Yeah, I mean, that's the power of storytelling. That's the power of podcasting and conversation. It really does ignite something in you. That remembrance is beyond word, it's a feeling and it's
It
a deep
is.
homecoming that
It is.
is sparked when you're out of your mind and you're really listening and receiving.
It is a return home. You got it. I love that. Yeah, I say that to a lot of people. Like, my role here is to help people remember who they are and return home to themselves.
Yeah,
And so that's my mission.
likewise.
I love it. We can do this together.
I know.
Together.
Well, I would love to connect more and collaborate in some way and discuss
Oh,
the
yes.
out because we only have a few minutes left. So I wanted to say that before you have to leave. Um,
Oh, I would love that. And, I think we should get you on my show as well. So I also have a podcast called When Spirit Calls.
I
So
know.
it's all about how when spirit calls us. So let's make sure that happens.
Yes, I would love to talk more because I'm really interested in the Akashic Records and like learning more about
Oh,
that as well.
well, I can give everyone kind of just a little bit for those that don't know what it is. The Akashic Records is your soul's library. So it is a space of consciousness that we go into. I use a prayer. Some people use meditation. And by the way, a lot of people are already tuning into the Akashic Records. They just don't know it. So it's like it's God's field, right? It's God's library. And it's such a beautiful, profound space where everything is amplified. So everything that is, was, and ever shall be is contained inside those beautiful Akashic records. And everyone is capable, by the way, everyone. There is not one person that cannot access their own Akashic records. And so yeah, it's just such a sacred, sacred space.
Wow.
So that's where I do most of my work. In fact, the book, I was in the records to channel the book. So I also want to give a shout out to my colleague, Darlene Butts. So she also channeled along with me. So I wrote the book and then she channeled a whole nother layer on top of what I had written. And it really was a team effort. And so her and I channeled this book, which
Wow.
is pretty interesting too. So all through the space of the Akash. So yeah, super fun.
Beautiful. Well, yeah, I'm so grateful to be connected with you and to have had you here sharing your story and just your angelic aura and energy here.
Ah,
So
thank
amazing
you.
for me and oh, it's just been so beautiful. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I've loved being in your presence too. You have the earth angel energy as well. So I fully receive that and I send it right back to you as well. Thank
Yay.
you so much for having me.